Hi, I'm Anita Walker, and welcome to our culture chat today. I am delighted that our guest is Harold Steward. He is artistic director, president, CEO, chief, head and man of all power in being Harold Steward from the Theater Offensive. I just add titles and figure that one or the other of them will be the right one, right, Harold?
Or you may be getting me in trouble, Anita. I just, somewhere I work at the Theater Offensive, yes, in whatever capacity they need me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And I want to start out, give you a chance to just talk a little bit about Theater Offensive for those who may be joining us today who aren't as familiar with this amazing organization that is both in our cultural investment portfolio and one of our exemplary creative youth development programs.
Thank you, Anita. You are too kind. And also, I think, thank you for this space. I think in this platform to be able to talk to the Massachusetts community and talk about the Theater Offensive. The Theater Offensive is over 30 years old. We celebrated last January, a year ago, our 30th anniversary, and started here in Boston. We've always been Boston based as a queer and trans organization. The language has evolved, so LGBTQ. So right now we say, queer and trans and inclusive organization that really was started by Abe Ryback and some of his peers in response to an HIV/AIDS epidemic. And I think we'll talk about, some of the things that we revisited about our founding that are relevant to this moment. And really, it was, to use cultural organizing, right? And I don't even think that was a phrase then, to address the issue of the time, or a issue of the time. And through, I think, not even Abe's wildest imagination, to go from a direct action, advocacy, street theater, responsive theater, to this formal institution that happened because of relevance and need and a growing way to express oneself and issues creatively in a city like Boston and in a state like Massachusetts. So the organization continued to grow. And now, last year, we approved a strategic plan and changed our mission to become a queer and trans people of color organization by mission. And that's always been a part of the way in which we've worked. But part of strategic planning is like, what is relevant for this moment and the organization that you are being and becoming. And we felt like a queer and trans people of color organization by mission was relevant. We still work in a very kind of responsive way, making sure we are queering our creative offerings and still celebrating self, creating communities of belonging, as well as addressing, the intersectional issues that affect our lives and well-being. So we have creative youth development program that you fund, True Colors, that actually is celebrating this 25th anniversary.
Oh, gosh.
I know, right?
Oh, my.
Which uses the creative youth development model and other models for you, again, to come explore, to create, to talk, to network, to build in their own kind of self-defined way with a lot of support. And one thing that I would say, our True Colors program is gearing up for its first ever national tour. And so we call ourselves the cultural ambassadors of the city of Boston right now, and maybe even the state of Massachusetts, definitely in queer youth theater.
And I'm going to ask Carmen to throw the image up. This will warm your heart for the day when you see the image that Harold has brought along to give you just a little visual impact of what True Colors and Theater Offensive is all about. And if that doesn't put a smile on your face, then it's just not possible today, because just keep that in your heart all day long, right?
Oh, yes.
So Harold, I just want to jump in. You raised it in your introductory comments. Just thinking side by side, COVID, AIDS. Talk about like, how is this feeling comparable? Like deja vu. I mean, well, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think and it's interesting because, finding the right terminology is even hard to say at the height of the COVID-19 moment, because it's like, oh, have we reached the height of it? But especially what we kind of marked things for our organization when we were making decisions when the governor declared a state of emergency. So that was the beginning of something for us. And what we immediately had to do was cancel our Beyond the Stage fundraiser for True Colors. That was 2 days later. And as you know, it was a kind of 24 hour by 24 hour, what are we up against? What do we need to do kind of analysis and decision making. And some point early on, when we had enough information to assess the moment, we decided that we would leave with a proclamation that said the theater offensive actually were made for this moment, and our birth, it's a birthright. We were born into a public health crisis, taking care of our people, lifting up our voice, and really coming together as a community. I think there's a lot of difference between that moment and this moment in terms of, you know, what was the public health threat, who was at risk, and even what that meant. And largely what the theater offensive was responding to was public response, you know, around largely gay men, I think at the time. But what I have learned from that moment is that the lesbian community and the trans community, you know, cared for gay men and then had to kind of care for themselves. And at the same time, our lesbian sisterhood was battling cancer. And still, you know, there was intersections between how society and the public was caring and invested in them. So, but when we look at what's similar, is that again, our voice is very important, our strategies are very important, and even part of how we operate is that our lives are constantly at risk, right? So whether it's a public health threat or the public or society or investment, and especially when you, now that we're people of color by mission, it is like, what is safety, you know, for us? And yet we live, we work, we thrive. So what do we know about our kind of mundane, utilitarian way of life that could inform this moment? And since that's the organization's thinking, again, it was like, no, we need to lead with a proclamation that says, see us, we see ourselves, and we will strategize based on that we know, right? And if it's any group of people who can create beauty out of chaos, it's the people who circumstance and situation have called us to do it all the time. So it was a moment of empowering moment that still had to say what we know we need to profile and then apply what we know. So we situated ourselves different. I think we led with a sense of pride, but it also gave us a sense of calm that, you know, in many ways, to quote Audre Lorde, we were never meant to survive, and yet we've survived some unthinkable things. And this moment is just, you know, a new way of thinking about survival.
So back to the sort of the focus of the organization, people of color, the queer trans community. People of color disproportionately affected by the coronavirus. So that's one sort of slice of your focus. And then I'm also thinking about, particularly I've been thinking a lot about the youth and True Colors. And the stories that I've heard over the years, I've had the opportunity to meet so many of these young people who have come into your organization and your space to escape the trauma at home. So now we have these same individuals sequestered in the place that may have been the source of their trauma. And we also have people of color, particularly male people of color, for whom their protection is also their threat, which is a mask. How do you think, how are you thinking about that? Both organizationally and personally?
I think I'll start personal because, you know, the personal is political, and it has to, all I know to apply to the organization is what I know personally and what I believe. And what's been grounding me is Black feminist thought, right? You know, it's the most intersectional thought that I've been able to come to encounter. And whether that's my grandmother saying, baby, you got to learn how to trust spirit, are whether it's Sonia Sanchez, and her work about being wounded in the house of a friend, right? And if I think about Sonia Sanchez and this work around wounded in the house of a friend and True Colors, understanding that, the place that one, if they have a place, so if they haven't been kicked out of homes, right? So there's increased homelessness among queer and trans youth. So what does that kind of look like? So we are assuming that there is a brick and mortar place. And we know we have an issue with shelters that have been closed, shelters that are not culturally competent. But if there is a place, is it the place where they feel safe and protected? And our program, again, you come, you explore your queer and trans identity, and you be and you become whoever you need to be, and you're able to do that in a network of peers. It is centered around what you know, and we're trying to supplement what you know. Not necessarily we have the playbook of queer and trans identity, and we're just teaching you about it. And we have these creative tools you also can create. So a lot of that you cannot duplicate virtually. The intent, the purpose is kind of lost. And so, but we can envision new purpose and new ways of being. And safety is a big thing, right? Safety is a major, major thing, because there's some people, when we talk about privilege, especially racial privilege, you only have to think about one threat, right? And your threat is not your financial outcome. May not even be your job, who you are. It's just like COVID-19, is a equal opportunity employer right now. And that, so we still have to think of what are the multiple layers of threats that a young person who's a queer and trans person of color going through, and how much of that can we create a response to. So we've had beautiful outpouring of support from individual and found institutional giving that just says, hey, if we've given you money and we have restricted it as unrestricted, we trust you to make the right decisions. We also have, and we've been connected to other partners like Bagley, who, again, if we can continue to make those stronger connections, they're able to think about youth need, queer and trans youth needs in a different way. So it's like, how do we be more integrated? Because some of the stuff that's still hard to come up with a solution for is the housing piece. If I'm a homeless queer trans youth, I could go to that place, and it's so symbolic that we meet in a church. We meet in a very affirming church. So there's a spiritual atmosphere that is there that says, come as you are, be how you want to be, and you'll be held. And for some people, it may be the only shelter that they can do constructive programs while they're trying to figure out where they're going to sleep that evening. So we call it temporary shelter. Those meals that we provide, if we ain't meeting unless we eating is a value. So, what are those kind of things? And then those critical resources that really, when we're looking at the lives of young people, it's a day-to-day reality. So you're able to assess what's going on with you today. That's how the True Colors meetings start, with the day-to-day. And if there's something that we could do as a body, right, to address the daily needs. And so I think the youth are still committed to meeting when they can, and then finding other ways to meet those other needs. And I think, again, part of the model is it is youth-led, so we just have to listen. What are you doing naturally? Because survival is, again, on Audre Lorde, it's not an academic tool. So the youth probably know more about survival than I do in this moment, especially when it comes to their needs. So how are we creating opportunities to listen? And the art making is still very important, right? So what is the cultural way of processing and creating in this moment, even if it's sharing breath, right? As a real cultural unifying thing, how do we make sure that that doesn't get lost? Because it is essential, I think, to survival.
I want to speak to some of the other people who are joining us on our conversation today, and point out, for those of you who are new to the small screen, that down at the bottom of your laptop, there's a little button that says Q&A. And if you'll just click on that, we would love to hear from you. Do you have questions? Do you have comments? Do you have stories to share? Do you have experiences? Please jump in and participate in our conversation, and I'll be keeping track and make sure that we give you a chance to join in. Harold, you've been hearing a lot from the young people that you work with, especially through the Creative Youth Development Program, and both of us are armed with a box of tissues because we anticipate that this could be one of those emotional moments. But tell us what you're hearing. What are the young people telling you?
So we started a relief fund. I think one of the things that was an easy no-brainer, our board gave us permission to take care of the contracts we already had with artists. We did not want to be a part of the problem. Even when our financial outlook was uncertain, we did not know. We had to cancel every fundraiser that we had. One of the things that makes me a proud leader of the organization is that what we count for earned income and ticket sales is only $1,000, which means we work really, really hard to make it financially accessible for you to engage with our programming, whether that's adult or you actually pay the youth to participate. So we were not losing a lot by canceling events, public events. And how we supplement that is a lot of fundraisers and a lot of support. So we were losing the opportunity to raise money in the special event RAM, but the board said, you know, we were blessed to have a small surplus last year and small reserves that we would take care of our artists and we would take care of our youth. And so we were able to launch recently a relief fund. And so we're starting to get the applications to come in, and it's hard for me to read them because I think at that point, it's really, really real. We get to see youth in their wholeness as one, essential workers. Like literally my job is in food industry and things like that. And some of those jobs they've lost. And the pre-conversation we were having, to be a leader in this moment is really, really tough because you're making decisions that impact people's lives one way or the other. You're going with what you know. There's a lot of things to assess in a quick amount of time. And then you have to attend to the personal, if there's time, right, to be a human being in this moment too. And reading those first round of applications, you know, I cried and I said, this is why I work hard and this is why I work in the way that I do. And this is the real blessing of the moment, to be able to provide some temporary relief for someone who really, really, really needs it. And this is what I was born to do. This is why this organization exists. This is why I'm a fierce advocate. And we've been able to build an organization around fierce advocacy because, you know, theater is a tool, right? And it's one of the many tools we use to tell our story, to impact the lives of people. But if we're not impacting the lives, telling a story, literally feeding and helping youth survive, then the theater part is not relevant for us as the theater offensive, right? So we're hearing, you know, loss of jobs, loss of income, and our relief fund for youth had to be very different because it wasn't about gig economy, because some of them, you know, are still really early in their career and the theater offensive is the gig, you know? So what we asked for is just, you know, just give us just, you know, what's going on. And really the grocery store worker, the restaurant worker, what some may not even be willing to share right now, the sex work, you know, and all of this kind of survival work that's really in jeopardy. I think, again, if we're thinking about public health, you know, what they need in order to survive, whether it's mental health or physical health or hormones or testosterone, like all of those things where you may not be able to articulate that and get funds to support that. But we understand that as like a whole person able to show up and be who you are in this life. And really, I think in this moment, to be able to do what we can towards those ends is why I'll show up tomorrow and I'll work hard tonight and I'll continue to advocate because this is what it means to live a full queer and trans life, especially as a person of color. And I would even say, especially as a trans or gender nonconforming youth, where sometimes they are lost in the kind of gay, lesbian, binary of LGBTQ identity. So those are the types of things that we're seeing. And to even be able to report back that we have a network of supporters who don't care about those things in terms of disqualifying you. If anything, they are so happy that we are able to be connected in this moment to you and meet your needs. So yeah, that's a portion of it, but each one is uniquely different. We do have folks who participate in drag culture, and it's like, performing is my life. And not only can I not perform to give life and get life, I also don't have that kind of income.
I want to remind people who are with us, and I know you're there because I can see your numbers down below. Jump in on the conversation. Send us a little note on the Q&A section. Ask a question. I've promised Carmen that we will always have at least 1 or 2 comments or questions during the course of our half hour. So I'm waiting on you to join us for this. Harold, one of the things that theater does, and that so many of our organizations and arts and culture really does, is it's the process of connecting. It's bringing people into the same space. It's bringing not only in the same physical space, but the same head space, because theater actually, it's empathetic. It puts you in the place of another person and lets you temporarily live that place or communicate the place that you're from. So many of your young people are able to tell their stories through theater in a way that they couldn't otherwise. You're not in the same physical space now because none of us are and we can't be. How is technology working for you?
I think technology has some opportunity and has some limits, right? So again, I think you have to have access to technology. You have to have, which, there's no free technology, 100% free technology. So that's another expense that occurs. There's also where you can utilize the technology. So again, if you want to talk about, just the basic kind of and queer identity coming out, or, a shift in pronouns, a shift in name, a shift in clothes, gender expression, where can you have that conversation without the worry of people hearing? And also, those conversations are quite emotional, right? So I think in the physical space, we can hold each other differently than you can in the virtual space. So it is great that many of our youth have access to technology and can find a space. But again, it's like we're on a virtual chat right now. It goes so far, and which dictates how much I can share and what I'm willing to share, with trust that even, this will be recorded or it'll go out. So who's watching, who's monitoring this? And so that kind of, and I would add the theater offensive is a sacred space. So is the virtual space as sacred and protected? Do I trust it, right? I think one thing that affected all of us is then the Zoom hacking, right? So it was like, oh, at any given moment, somebody can hack this space, or it's not as safe as I thought it was. And then there's also things like, we haven't experienced it dead on, but it's the possibility for cyberbullying, for, and who's in earshot, right? So if I'm sharing this, who's in your house, and things like that. So the virtual space also creates some opportunities in terms of how can we utilize it to spread a message, right? To reach other communities, to connect with other youth, and to create art, right? So if it's performance-based, what are the functions of a Zoom or other virtual thing? I think in the art making and for the theater offensive, it's a different type of investment to make sure you have what you need in the technology to create. I was watching The Voice last night, and they sent all the contestants like their own studio at home with lights and things like that so they could sing their song. And I think for us, it's like, what is that package that we could deliver that has the technological advances as well as other things? So you're engaging with us creatively or not, but you have, a care package, I would say, that is a creative care package, maybe a way to frame it.
We have a couple of questions from a couple of good friends of ours that I think you and I both know very well. Let's start with Charles Baldwin. And of course, he says, we're looking for imagination and co-creation when we look at the cultural landscape. What ideas are emerging from our youth? We know that trauma has infected so many of these lives. Where do you see our young spirits aligning?
Excellent question. I think, one, there are things that youth were already doing in the virtual space. around connection, around kind of sharing and innovation. They were just not financially supported, or the home organization didn't have the platform to kind of spread it. I think again, TikTok is a perfect example of, creating 15 seconds, sharing, building. I also think, I want to shout out ZoomX in the way in which they have been able to have a unified message that folks have added to through song, kind of virtually. So it really is that kind of culture of, hey, I can create something. Can you take it virtually and build and add to it? And then how do we kind of share it? I think in that moment, and what technology is needed, and what's the prompts, right? And is this kind of valid culture? But co-creation, I think virtually there are tools that folks are interested in kind of sharing. And then I also think when we're thinking about the kind of creative exchange or thought partnership, like how to be in community with one another and conversation with one another in the sharing of offerings, there are things coming up in terms of who are the teachers, right? So what does a master class look like virtually, and how can I learn something different or be the master teacher differently? So those are some of the ideas about sharing. I would say again, for queer youth of color, queer and trans youth of color, there's still this hesitance because with visibility comes a certain type of responsibility. So again, how far do we want the message or the creative offering to reach is what we're trying to assess, because again, it is sacred, and queer and trans identity is ever evolving. So we don't want to be judged or stuck by that decision or what we chose to share in that way a couple of weeks ago, because we're still, again, it's a youth development model. So the development is still kind of happening. So how do we share things, understanding that this is not final, this is iterative, which I think I like to say we're all in the business of creative risk. So a play is never done. This is just the moment we got it to. So what does that look like with the understanding? Because also in a virtual space, you're open to the court of public opinion and judgment and comments. So we're still trying to assess what feels sacred. I'll give you an example. The youth are planning our 25th True Color kind of virtual celebration that was supposed to be in person, and it may have to be multiple ones because they feel like the first one is for them, for being a part of a 25-year legacy and celebrating it in their way. The first thing that they do is for them. It's not for the public. And maybe the second one is like, okay, now you're invited in, that we've had our moment to be acknowledged and acknowledged in the way that we want to.
We have also heard from another good friend, Michael Ibrahim, and he says, how are you staying connected and staying engaged with youth that may have fallen off the radar since programs have ended? And also, what was the theater offensive? What are you considering as the road to recovery? Do you plan to disrupt the business model? And then he says, with 3 exclamation points, we love theater offensive.
Oh, thank you. If I wanted to be the regular Harold, I would say, well, who's the we? So I can make sure I give all the love. There's to the royal we. The first question, how are we staying connected, is also, we're looking at transition in terms of the in and out. And this is also a natural time for some youth to say, maybe I want to move on to a different program and create space for other youth to come in. At the Theater Offensive, we're experiencing a lot of transition, staff-wise, artist-wise, and youth-wise, and we have a value to honor people's decisions on engaging with us or staying with us. So because their realities are changing day by day, it's, kind of check-ins via email or text, or all the ways they communicate to say, we have a kind of bi-weekly, you can just come, Zoom in, it's loosely programmed, we'll address some things. And this is more of the leadership of our True Colors. So alumni and things like that, who really are our eyes and ears, and giving us perspective on queer and trans youth life at this moment. And so it's that kind of check-ins, and the theater offensive remains a space where, you know, you can call, you can text, you can, you know, whatever you need in the moment, is one way that we're staying connected. And then we're also figuring out what's the right amount of offerings, right? So we don't want to inundate them with a lot of things, but just create this kind of open platform, almost like what's the virtual drop-in space that we can kind of hold. I think, the question left, so I didn't see the
Well,
other part of it.
the other part of it is your business model and sustainability of the organization.
So I think, again, we had reserves. So, and people have shown up in amazing ways to sustain the organization through this moment. And our fiscal year ends on June 30th. It really is, what is our future? Because how long are we in this moment, and how are we making decisions now that affect our future? There were things that we loved about the business model. So what are we holding on to is another question. And again, how did we get to the point that we didn't have to rely on ticket sales? Because again, if we have to cancel it all and rethink it, we know $1,000 is good amount to lose for our organization. So what is it about that model that really is the messaging of what individuals and foundations are supporting, making it clear? I think we work off a business model where what we do is the incentive. So being connected and knowing, so we don't incentivize it with a lot of opportunities like tickets and name recognition and things like that. So we've been able to build a base that understands that we can communicate that, like, the importance and the impact. So how do we increase that? To let folks know that if we can't do art in the same way, we still need to be connected to the lives. I think it affects what we're able to do in terms of how we're thinking about external programs, what they should cost, the partnerships, because we don't own our own space. You know, we're a part of the business plan for a lot of other cultural organizations and partner institutes, meaning, oh, you're going to come, you're going to rent, we're going to co-create. So we want to be able to have this shared economy where the BCA, Hibernian Hall, EBA, we're still able to program and share to make sure that the ecology is strong. And as you know, and other folks know, we had released a press release that we were building a theater in the Fenway. So we're in this beautiful partnership with the city and Scape. And one of the things that's very relevant, and we're trying to figure out, you know, how to raise those millions of dollars, because what I can appreciate about my cultural leaders here and peers, everybody is thinking about how to build a stronger arts ecology, and brick and mortar spaces are still important. And the more a place like the Theater Offensive can be focused on a segment of the community, it feels like we're addressing the whole. So now we're really, you know, we had a statement of intent for that building that is still relevant, but has a different amount of relevance, because, you know, we were managing a space for the city's queer and trans artists of, not even artists of color, just artists and creatives could come and create and process work and share work. So when we're thinking about a business model or what the future is, it's like, we can't let that die, right? It is more relevant now than it was just a month ago. So how do we shape our mind and our fundraising efforts and our communications and build public support, private support, community support to make that space a reality? So there is what we call like a healing space, a space that I know that I can create. There's less competition for other spaces in the city, and one that sees me first around my queer and trans identity, and then we build from there.
Yeah, I'm convinced that I don't know what post-COVID is, or if it's just ongoing COVID forever, but the need for organizations like Theater Offensive isn't diminishing, it's increasing, if anything. We're going a little over, but I do want to just end, because I think Charles has posed a question that I think goes to the heart of really the moment that we're in. And I'm really interested in how you respond to his question, which is this disease, coronavirus, has exposed the pain, trauma of brutal inequities, and we have witnessed daily divisive rallying. How might we keep pushing a common purpose and a civic responsibility while honoring our distinctions, identities, and personal agency?
Yeah, I think, you know, thank you, Charles, for the good questions, and Michael. for the good questions. I would say this is Harold speaking as an adult, not necessarily about or for youth in this moment. And I'm speaking about the fullness of who I am as a Black, queer, um, genderqueer person who is red, male a lot, and still has a pronoun that's he. And this thing about exposing pain and trauma, there's something in me that feels like what I would say to that is like, I told you so. I've been telling you this is the issue. So I don't know who's getting exposed in this moment, but I think what I see is people who don't share my unique complexity at the same risk or similar risk that I am now. And so now it feels like, oh, the trauma or the pain or the threat of it is shared. So again, I don't know what day the police are going to decide to kill me or not kill me. So there's a lot of things that have not shifted for me in terms of trauma being exposed, but now this fear is shared. So I think if anything can happen, it's like, trust oppressed people when they say this is what they're doing and experiencing. Trust oppressed people when they say this is what they need. So because now you have a similar fear, especially around something like public health, right? There was a lot of justification, especially during the Reagan era, of why, gay men, like almost like we deserved it, right? And no one deserves any kind of public health, whether it's based on their personal actions or not. We should be smart enough to eliminate public health threats, right? Especially since we know that there's an industrial complex where people profit largely around our public health inequities. So I think, again, for me, it just feels like, okay, come back to the table that we've already set. Let us continue to lead and guide the conversation with a new set of ears and interests that could actually save us all, right? So if we had taken care of the HIV/AIDS, people who were at risk for HIV and AIDS in the 80s, we would be able to apply more knowledge now. But since we didn't care for them, we discarded them and we were disposable. Now we're trying to figure out what it is that we need to do because we're all at risk. So what's being exposed is, I think, the silence and the ways in which privileged people thought that they were safe. And so it's like no one is safe. A socialist society really serves us all. And there's enough wealth and intellect in this community, in this world, for all of us to live full and thriving lives. So how do we, and I would say largely, I know people of color, I know queer and trans people of color are tired of the decision, the conversations around it, and we're ready to continue to build off of actions that we've already started. And I think, again, it's not lost on me that this is a conversation with public agency. And there's, what we've already paid to have this conversation and these actions by tax dollars. So what I want to track now, what are we moving forward, right? There's a list of stuff that folks who feel like they need a conversation can read. There are things that have been recorded. There's a history of actions and information that if folks want to catch up, they can do it. But queer and trans people of color, we're moving towards action and implementation and celebration because we know this moment very, very, very well, and we know how to survive it. So it's an invitation, I think, for other people to kind of join us and don't move us away from the table from a place of core leadership and quality perspective and essential voice, right? Yeah.
I think you said it, Harold. Well put. And really, it brings us to why this is really a seminal moment in your work is more critical now than ever before. And I'm so glad to have your leadership in Massachusetts and at the Theater Offensive, and to take the mission into this new time and new place and new dynamics in a way that I think is really going to benefit everybody. So thank you. Thank you, Harold, for being part of our chat today. Thanks for all you're doing. You'll have to come back again and we'll finish our conversation.
We'll finish. And we're going to toast. We're going to send you off in style. Thank you for your leadership. And I love California, so
Oh,
when I
but you
knock on the
gotta see it.
door, I'm coming.
You're coming. I got a spot for you. Take it
Beautiful.
easy.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all for joining us.